Hey everyone, welcome and thank you for joining our first ever EMEA Modern Data Stack Conference. I'm Alexa Fogarty, Customer Marketing Manager at Fivetran, and your MC for today. We're excited to share, learn, and build community today over data. Joining me this morning is my longtime colleague and Fivetran's VP of EMEA, Nate Spohn.
Hello, everybody. Very warm welcome to you all. It was about 5 years ago that both Alexa and I joined Fivetran in a very small office in San Francisco. And I think little did we realize what a rocket ship we would be stepping into and the entire revolution that is happening with the modern data stack and with the technology behind it. If we look forward now, I've been in Europe for about 3.5 years, involved in so many amazing projects with our partners, with our customers across the region. So we're really delighted to share all of those with you today. If we talk about first level and high level, what is the modern data stack? So I think many companies, organizations have this ambition to be truly data driven. And what this means is that almost anybody in their organization would be able to ask a question of data and get the answer almost immediately. And this can very significantly shift cultures where you're no longer really battling about differing opinions. You have the data in front of you. It aligns people together and it helps an organization move forward quickly. Additionally, there's a huge advantage in innovation. If you can access all of your team, all of your organization in looking for areas for improvement in using data to do that, you will really remain competitive in the market and step forward. And there has been a massive shift in technology. When we talk about the modern data stack, over the last 10 years, there's been a huge shift in technology. So in the old world, many of the applications that we used were on-premise. The data warehouses and places that we would centralize our data were on-premise. The reporting, because on-premise architecture requires so much more maintenance, it's so much less scalable, you really would have finite reporting that was much more rigid and could only serve a few users. So you would have executives with some level of insights, but it wasn't democratized throughout the whole organization. With the advent of the cloud, cloud data warehouses have emerged, which have really separated compute and storage. All of a sudden, it's almost free to store data. Compute is much more dynamic, and the maintenance required with optimizing a data warehouse has almost gone away. And this innovation has really carried on to BI and also data integration. All of a sudden, your data is in SaaS applications as well as in databases, and you can centralize that data with almost no maintenance. And with a much more robust data integration, with much better data integrity. And then when you go on to the BI side, it's much easier to get a single understanding of the truth across all of your data and really empower all of your different business users to make those decisions. So I think this shift into the modern data stack has really enabled us to take a big leap forward in enabling our organizations to be data driven. And of course, this is only possible as a collective. There are many organizations that we're on this journey together with. So I'd very much like to thank our partners and sponsors for this event: AWS, Snowflake, BizStory, and Google Cloud. As well, I would like to thank all of you. We have 750 registrants for the event, which is fantastic. We also have many speakers, and we have our 4 partners. So this is a summary here. We've got a lot of incredible stories to share with you later today, case studies from all over the region. And without further ado, I will pass it to Alexa to take you through the agenda.
Thanks, Nate. We have a great lineup of speaker sessions for you kicking off very soon. At this point, I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our talented speakers. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping rules. While I know it's a little harder to network during a virtual conference than an in-person conference, let's still give it our best. Take the opportunity to meet someone new using the networking tab located within the platform on the top right. We want you to make the most of today by exchanging ideas with one another. As another layer of added interaction, you have the ability to submit questions and answer polls during speaking sessions. Your questions can be submitted via the chat function, and you'll be directed to answer polls throughout the session. Finally, surveys will also be sent at the conclusion of today, so you can provide feedback to help us elevate for next year. Final piece of housekeeping is that we ask throughout the Modern Data Stack conference for you to be respectful. This is a collaborative environment that we hope will elevate your knowledge, not hinder it. Any concerns, please email chris@fivetran.com or myself at alexa@fivetran.com. So now that we got the rules out of the way, let's kick off our first keynote session. Nate is now going to speak about how analytics is becoming as simple and reliable as electricity, joined by Bob Muglia, Fivetran board member and entrepreneur, Magnus Carlsson, head of innovation I&D Scandinavia at Capgemeni, and Alex Billar, VP of platform EMEA at Snowflake. So again, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. I hope you have a great conference full of insights and networking. And with that, let's kick it off.
Welcome again to the EMEA Modern Data Stack Conference. I can say on behalf of Fivetran and our whole EMEA organization, we are incredibly excited to be hosting this event. I want to give a massive shout out to our marketing department, to our partners, to our customers who have all put a huge amount of effort into this event. I'm very excited for what's to come. For the keynote, we have a little bit of a different take. I have, over the last few weeks, interviewed a number of the key players in the modern data stack, and I'm really excited to share those interviews with you here now. First up, we have Bob Muglia, who was the original CEO of Snowflake and arguably one of the founding fathers of the modern data stack. He has a whole long history in Microsoft and in the data space, and has some incredibly interesting insights to share on his perspective of the modern data stack. After that, we have Magnus, who's the VP of Data Insights at Capgemeni in the Nordics, and he shares a very compelling and interesting perspective from a lot of the work that he's doing up in that region. And then last, but definitely not least, we have Alex Billar, who is the VP of Platform at Snowflake. He was one of the original people at Snowflake and introduced many of the original Snowflake projects on the west coast of the US, and has since come over to Europe. He's based in Amsterdam, and we're incredibly lucky to have him in this part of the world. So without further ado, let's kick into the interview with Bob. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for taking the time to have this conversation. It's really exciting talking to you, because I think you've been in this world for a long time, starting out as a product manager for SQL Server, I think the first one, and then really building Snowflake into a leader in the cloud data warehouse space and in the modern data stack. So I'd love to just start out by getting your view on what kind of a high-level overview of what the modern data stack is, and what kind of business implications it can have for companies that adopt it.
Well, first, great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. It's amazing to see how things have changed over that period of time, because we're going back to the late 80s when I started working on SQL Server, and things were pretty simple back then compared to the data challenges that people are having today. The world has really turned upside down in some ways with data, and data has become very central to what people are working on, and thus the ability to do analysis from it, predictions, all of these things have become incredibly important. And what we've seen in the last few years is the emergence of what's been known as the modern data stack. And it's a great term because it really speaks to different services that are all designed to work together to solve the problem of data analysis and data predictions, and being able to use the most modern tools associated with data today and bringing them and making them available to just about everybody. There's a workflow to data. It really starts with operational systems. And most of those operational systems these days are SaaS applications. The majority of systems that people use tend to be SaaS. They have a number of in-house systems that perhaps are even more important, that have some of the most important data they have, typically in key databases. That's where data starts. It's operational. It's now. It's the present. The workflow of data actually is a time flow. It goes from today and now through a pipeline to a historical system of record, which is typically a modern data warehouse, and that uses SQL as its primary modeling tool. And then from there, there's the opportunity to do predictive analytics, and systems are built, services are built to do that. And then, of course, there's a wide variety of different tools that are available, all the services today that allow you to do BI and analysis, and we're seeing governance tools being created and data lineage tools. There's a whole ecosystem that's been built. But this idea is all around that the data stack can be delivered as a service. The modern data warehouse is essentially eliminated the limits that are associated with working with data. So you can have any data, any size, any number of users. And then SQL is used as both the data modeling tool as well as the transformation tool. So that's really the modern data stack. All services, all available, all working together to help you solve your hardest data problems.
Yeah. No, and it's exciting because I think people have been trying to answer questions with data forever, but really these breakthroughs are allowing organizations to progress a lot more. I'm curious, I've heard you talk before about the shift in architecture from on-premise data warehouses to in the cloud data warehouses, and really the massive transformation that was able to happen with that. I'd love to kind of hear a little bit more and for you to explain what are the core tenets of that shift and why are they powerful for companies?
It's really about scalability if you really look at it, because if you look at a modern cloud data warehouse like a Snowflake or a BigQuery, those tools don't have the scale limits that on-premises systems had, and those scale limits made people do unnatural things. They put data in silos because the systems simply couldn't support what people were trying to do, and they had to break it up to do it. Those problems are all gone. And the cloud has enabled systems, as I say, to work with any type of data. We started with structured and semi-structured data, and now that is being transcended into different kinds of complex data, images, videos, documents. All of these things are data sources that are very interesting, and modern cloud systems enable people to work with that, and they don't require the deep expertise that was needed even just a few years ago. And that's the big difference, is the democratization of data. 5 years ago, a few companies in Silicon Valley could do this. Now, because of the breakthroughs of the cloud, it's available to everyone, and everyone has the capabilities to be a master of data.
Yeah, that was exciting. One thing that I actually saw in a keynote you gave about 2 years ago was one of the benefits of cloud data warehouses is that traditional ETL tools, data pipeline tools, can just sync up to them, and the migration from an older system isn't that difficult. But that being said, like you talked to the evolution of the architecture of data warehouses, I'm wondering if this architecture shift in data warehouses has also opened up an architecture shift on data integration and data pipeline tools, and what are the benefits that you can get? How should companies think about whether it's right for them to adopt a different architecture there, or whether they should stick with what they have?
Well, it's almost an imperative for people to adopt a different architecture because they need to pull data from all of these SaaS applications. And traditional ETL tools were built long before SaaS, so they're not particularly good at that. And getting data out of these different applications is unique and tricky. And it's helpful to have a product like Fivetran that was really designed to do that from the beginning. But the thing that's changed underneath all of this is the fact that the data warehouse has gone from a precious resource which had to be protected at all costs because it was expensive and you didn't want to use it for things like data transformations, to now a very cost-effective way of working with data. And in fact, the most cost-effective way of working with it. And so what a modern ETL tool like Fivetran does is it takes the data that is in the operational system and it essentially copies it into a an opinionated or normalized form. Typically, it's quite similar to the original schema. And then in the data warehouse is where you do the transformations into the dimensional schema that's used for analytics, and is much more useful for working with the data. It has to be transformed. And that process, instead of happening in a proprietary ETL tool, in the modern data stack, it happens in the data warehouse. And it happens with SQL and tools like dbt. So so you have, as a result of this, you have SQL as a standardized modeling language and a standardized data transformation language. So the ability to understand the lineage of this is much, much more straightforward than it was in the past. And you can see all of these things in a consistent way within the schemas in your data warehouse. It's a very modern way of doing this, and that's where the world has moved to.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really exciting. One thing I'm curious about is the types of problems that companies can solve now if they have a modern data stack, if they have that architecture in the cloud data warehouse and their data pipeline tool. I'd be curious, what kind of advantages will a company get in terms, the types of questions they're able to answer, and how urgent do you think it is for companies to adopt this, or is it something that they can approach slowly? Yeah.
Well, I think every company has to approach it the way is appropriate for their business. First of all, and they have to prioritize it based on their business. That said, it's a business imperative for everybody, because in today's world, you have to be able to work with data to be competitive. It is table stakes these days in a modern industry to be good at data. And if you're great at it, if you're able to use data to do predictive analytics, you can get insights into your business that were impossible to get before. And the challenges of the past of having data all over the place and the inability to analyze it in a consistent way, those problems are pretty much eliminated with a proper implementation of the modern data stack. So it facilitates this sort of capability for, as I say, organizations of all sizes to work with data and to compete with the giants in the industry on what is much more a level playing field than has ever been true before. So it's very important, and it's very doable today. And this is the place to learn that and to begin to implement this and to become great at data within your organization.
Yeah, very well said. Kind of one thing that I sort of think about as a utopia in the future, and I think we've come so far in terms of where we used to be, but there's also further that we can go. And I imagine a world where almost anybody in an organization with, security restraints and confidentiality constraints, but can ask almost any question of data and get the answer, pretty much instantaneously, and it shifts culture. And
the cultural shift is really amazing that you can have. And this is one of the most important elements, because one of the things that I've learned is that honest data, true data, when you're seeing everything, you need to see it all. I mean, little facts that are one-off, that's not data, right? You have to actually look at data in context, understand everything about it. But when you have that, and it's straightforward to have that with the modern data stack, when you have that, it can change decision-making entirely. You can take a topic that might take weeks to resolve based on opinion and get it resolved in a matter of minutes based on data. What I have found is that when true data is presented to people, whatever opinions they have, they can fall by the wayside, and convergence can occur, because people look at data, and data tells the truth. And in business, you need to follow what your customers are saying, and that is reflected in the data. And these sorts of decisions are now possible.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. It makes a lot of sense, and I'm excited not only to help other companies implement this, but also just to use it in our own work in the company that we have, and really drive as much decisions as we can, empower the teams that we have. So thank you very much for sharing your insight. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Bob. I know in the research for this interview, I watched several of his keynotes on YouTube that are incredibly compelling. I would definitely recommend. And we're very lucky to have Bob Muglia on the board of Fivetran, helping to guide us forward, which is incredibly exciting. But next up, we have Magnus, who is the VP of Data Insights in the Nordics. I'm very excited for this conversation, so here we go. So Magnus, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. For those that don't know, you're the VP of Data Insights at Capgemeni in Sweden. So I think you have a very interesting perspective. And I'd love to start out with your thoughts on why you think access to data is becoming much more simple and reliable nowadays.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think there are two aspects to this: digitalization and data democratization. The first one the digitalization has resulted in many business processes is now visible as data footprints. So we know more what's happening when we interact or between systems and people and machines. But that later has led to availability of data through data lake initiatives. So both of this is driving the more increased amount of data available that's also easy to get hold of. However, it's important to notice that availability is not always translating into usage. But system software providers who provide APIs make this, of course, much more easy. But not all data is available through these APIs. And of course, it's a super important thing that also happened that we now have better platforms to extract and get data from these APIs and other sources.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that there's so much data these days, so many APIs to get data, and sometimes sometimes you have trouble getting the data, but then other times you have the data and you have trouble using it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe this kind of leads into my next question, and I'm wondering, what do you think are the biggest roadblocks that data teams face today?
Yeah. We meet many different data teams from different industries, and I would say the roadblocks, they vary. But in general, I would say the biggest obstacle is understanding the meaning of data and the way data domains connect with each other through business rules. Secondly, the efforts in data engineering are still most time-consuming. The data teams typically want to modernize into cloud data platform or build data catalogs and enter a state of DevOps and get the cloud foundation in place. But to get this value or get value out of data behavior also need to change, and that is harder and a more challenging journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are you hopeful in the next couple of years that the effort that goes into getting access to data will become easier?
Yes, I'm very hopeful. We think we're doing a great progress there right now. So yeah, I'm very hopeful. But then again, we get even more data, so yeah, it keeps.
One other thing that's a big part of all of our lives is the pandemic, and I think it's affected every aspect of our lives. And I'm curious how you think it's affected data teams and doing analysis. If you have any insight there.
I think the pandemic has inflected our industry or affected our industry very much. For instance, we are heavily impacted now, especially our friends and colleagues in India. Well, this is, of course, very troublesome, but we also learned during this time to work in other ways. We also learned that data teams, they tend to be more creative when they're together, but to solve complex problems. But we also learn now how to work more efficiently remote and actually work for us also with data and use data to collaborate in a much better way. And then, of course, all in all, this change emphasized the importance of analytics and using data to do joint decisions and being productive together.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, out of challenges or out of differences can come innovation. My next question kind of plays into that.
Yeah.
Being data driven, like companies have pioneered being data driven in the US and in North America and also in EMEA. And, we have some unique things that we've done in EMEA with GDPR. And I'm curious, how you think being data driven might be different in EMEA and what the strengths or weaknesses might be there.
Yeah, I think we have some unique challenges, and the EU is very diverse. So we have many vibrant local communities where AI and data-driven companies thrive. But in general, I would say we might seem a bit slower, maybe than Asia and the US. And as you point out, we have some challenges from the directives from European Union on how to handle data. We're also getting directives, I think, on AI and in general and the use of AI. But in the end, this might prove to be an advantage as well, because we see more and more push on using ethics in AI, transparency, explainable AI, and as that becomes more and more prevalent, that might also be an advantage for EMEA and something we can build a competitive advantage on.
Yeah, I find that a really interesting perspective that, as data becomes more and more prevalent in our lives, more and more concerns come about. You can see even in the US, there's a lot of questions that are happening now in the public sphere about this. And it may be that the innovation in that regard is something that Europe is a first mover in.
Yeah.
So kind of speaking to things that might happen in the future, I'm curious, you're very much involved in a lot of innovative companies, helping companies really be at the forefront of being data-driven. What do you think are the next 3 trends that'll come out in the coming years?
Yeah, let's say if it's just 3 trends, but there are lots of trends coming up right now. One thing I would like to point out is development of data ecosystems. Many large organizations, they see the opportunity to create an internal data ecosystem and a data market. First internally, but then also work with partners, suppliers, and of course customers to build this data platform, industrial data platform, for their own sake. And we talk a lot about that, and also that increasing focus in that respect to monetize on data, of course, when you create this ecosystem. And that leads to investments like in data catalogs, data quality, and AI. And I wouldn't say that these are trends that are already here, but they will be emphasized over time, over the next years. And many of these technologies that we need to establish data platforms and data ecosystems, they are already here, but they are not used fully yet. For instance, to mention 3 things, then, like data federation, data mesh type of architectures, smart metadata, smart data catalogs, smart data governance, building intelligence into that area. And then, of course, data virtualization, so avoiding to move data, but be able to use it in many places and for many different purposes. So that will drive innovation, I would say.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's all about having the data, like a common understanding of the truth in terms of how you're looking at the data, and having it centralized in a place where it's very usable and it can be applied immediately by a lot of different business groups. Is kind of like the implications of these trends long term?
Yeah, I think so. Centralization would be a bit of a dangerous word, I would say, because you know it's a combination. We don't want to centralize too much. That tends to make everything slow. Mm-hmm. But we want to centralize things we need to have central, and then give freedom to different areas of the organization to be creative on their data without without being blocked by slow systems and slow ways of working.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. It is
Thank
very
you.
much appreciated.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you again to Magnus for sharing all of those compelling insights. We certainly look forward to working together in the years ahead. Next up, we have Alex Billar, VP of Platform at Snowflake, and I would hazard a guess he's been involved in more modern data stack projects than almost anyone out there. So here we go. All right. Well, Alex, we're delighted to have you here. For those that don't know, Alex is the VP of Platform at Snowflake. He was one of the early Snowflake employees, and together with our co-founder, Taylor, introduced the modern data stack to many of the customers on the West Coast of the US, and now we're very lucky to have you over here in EMEA. So I'd love to kick off with your understanding of what do you think are the biggest challenges that data teams face when implementing the modern data stack?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and great question. When I think of the modern data stack, I think of a couple things. And when it comes to challenges, I think there's one kind of glaring challenge that comes out. And it goes back to really the core concept of what data warehousing was when we looked at it 40 years ago. And that was the idea of centralizing your business data into one place. And what we've seen is as data has become larger and more complex, and it has kind of started coming in different types, that organizations started doing things like creating a data lake independent from a warehouse with maybe data marts as well for different business functions. And all of a sudden now this central source of truth is living in 3 different places. I think the biggest challenge that the companies face is trying to find the tool of choice to get data through this pipeline. And I see every day there's a tool for this and a tool for that, and organizations might have like one tool for Salesforce and another tool for Marketo, and an internal team building their database replication, and all of a sudden now they have to go to a bunch of different places and a bunch of different teams to figure out how data is syncing, where is it syncing to, what process is it being used to transform, and if it goes to a lake first, well, do they use a Hadoop or Hive to transform that data and then move it into a warehouse? Are they using something like Spark? What SQL dialect are they using here? What SQL dialect are they using there? And a modern data stack should have one set of code, and it should be very easy to use, and it should work for all the different sources that an organization has. So I think about like some of the projects I worked on with you guys, where we could walk into someone's environment and say, well, what source is next on your roadmap? And maybe it's, okay, well, we plan to bring in Marketo next quarter. I said, well, what if we could bring Marketo in the next 15 minutes? And be able to walk in and click a button and start syncing all of that data and have it available to be queried right away without the need of any team to write any code. And all of a sudden, they're within Snowflake, and they have the power of the environment, and they can run whatever they want against that data right away. So from a challenge standpoint, it really is overcomplicating things and introducing tools that have specialized skill sets. I think I see people like introducing Spark for really no reason, and when they don't need to, because they assume that's the most performant, or they have a team that might want to play with it. And I would just challenge organizations to think, well, like, how do we reduce the number of tools in our environment, and how do we pick the right tool that is easy to use and self-managed, so that we aren't spending time making decisions of what tool to choose, and taking months to implement these technologies. It should be point and click, load and query.
Wonderful. That makes a lot of sense. You spoke about Hadoop, and I think there have been a lot of attempts for companies to store all this data that we're creating today, and compute and store. Sometimes that's gotten a little bit confused with companies. So how do you think companies who are thinking about data storage, storing all this data that's being created these days, how should they think about it?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think if any of my previous customers happen to be listening to this, they might have heard this before. But I like to talk about the idea of why the data warehouse exists in the first place. And you think it was something that, a concept that was brought about really in the 80s. And it was the idea of storing a company's operational business data in one place to start to gain valuable insights from it. And over time, as organizations collected, very vast types of data from IoT and applications and websites, there wasn't enough capacity on these kind of legacy technologies, and it was prohibitively expensive in order to scale these. And so people started looking at separating that into a data lake where they could store lots of data very cheaply, and then a data warehouse where they could store their most important business data to access it quickly. And the issue with that was that all of a sudden data is in two different spots. And then you'd have certain teams that would want just their data, and then there's a data mart for them. And now data is in three spots. And I look at this as like going back to the original concept. Customers today shouldn't have to worry about big data, small data, structured data, unstructured data. They should be able to store all of the business data in one spot to be able to gain insights like they were promised 30 years ago, 40 years ago now. And I like to also tell the analogy of, if I'm in my apartment and I have 1,000 tables in my apartment, it's not going to be a very efficient apartment to walk through. I'm just going to have to, meander around tables and figure out which table to use for what. And, where I see customers struggle is back to that, is they just kind of store all of this data and don't really make use of it. And I think a lot of that comes down to having a governance policy that applies to their business, and moving forward to more of kind of a data mesh type architecture where they're allowing their business units to consume from kind of one central source of truth, but to model that as they see fit for their use case. But again, I think the most important thing that I've seen, and it's been difficult for customers historically, is back to centralizing all of their data into one place, in one tool, with one set of code, and not having to worry about 5 different SQL dialects that they might be proliferating through their teams.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think leads very much into the next question, which is about how can companies make access to data simple and reliable. And I think Snowflake has done a huge amount to make the whole data warehouse function incredibly simple, easy to maintain. How should companies think about getting some of those same benefits in terms of integrating all the data into a central data warehouse?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, when I work with companies, and I work with companies that are 100 employees or 100,000 employees and have massive engineering teams. And the thing is like these organizations are not database companies. They are manufacturing, or they're retail, or they're consumer packaged goods, or maybe they're in life sciences. They're fintech, whatever it may be. And I think about it kind of like an iPhone, and that I don't necessarily need to know that I have a Samsung screen and LG memory and the megahertz of the processor that's running in there. I buy it because it works. And when I need an application, I can go to the App Store and click an app, and I can get that source. And again, one of my favorite things about, I think working with both of our tools together is when I can walk into an organization and be like, what is a data source that you have on your roadmap that you haven't been able to sync today? Maybe it's Marketo, maybe it's Zendesk, Jira, Salesforce, you name it. You guys have a lot of connectors. And we can go in and through Partner Connect, which you guys, I think, were one of the first partners that actually was available in Partner Connect, literally click one button and start syncing that data and have it available within minutes, should be the way that organizations move forward. And when you start making things more complicated, it just slows down the speed of time to value. And at the end of the day, data should be used to drive insights for a business, and should be able to help them predict the future and where to go and make decisions. And if they're really struggling with getting all of it into one place, or maybe they're putting it in 2 or 3 different places, it really just, there's not a lot of value there. And so I think from that set, like find tools that are really easy to use and can enable your teams to do more with the data, not manage the process.
Yeah, that makes a huge amount of sense. And I guess you've seen the challenges companies have faced on both sides of the pond, over in the US and then here in Europe. So I'm curious, what do you think are some of the unique challenges that EMEA faces?
Yeah, I think it's been a great experience coming over here. I kind of like to make the joke of, while I see a bunch of different languages across Europe, SQL is the one dialect that everyone speaks. But in general, in Europe, I think organizations, they have different regulations and kind of compliance that they need to adhere to. And they've been, I would say, relatively more reluctant to adopt the cloud and cloud technologies. And many of them have had relationships with some of the kind of big vendors for a long time, the Amazons or the Microsofts. And, they think, okay, well, I have this relationship on-prem. I'm just going to take the same relationship and move it into the cloud. Whereas the businesses kind of in the US that I saw were like, we're going to find the best of breed technology as we're moving platforms. And I think a lot of them have been on the cloud for close to a decade now. I think AWS is 15 years old. And so most of the organizations I was working with in the United States were like, yeah, we've been on the cloud. We've been on the cloud for 5 years. We see that, that kind of buying everything from the infrastructure provider is not really as easy as they say it will be. And we're ready to kind of adopt, as we're calling it, a modern data stack. Whereas I think, in Europe, customers have struggled, and customers kind of come to me a lot and ask the question of like, well, hey, how do I think about this? And when I look at most architectures, it's very complex to get data from the source into the hands of their consumers, because they haven't had a chance to go through a cloud migration in the past, and they might not be understanding like what tools are out there that could simplify that process for them. And like I said, some of my favorite projects in the US were walking into a customer to start a proof of concept with you guys and walk out an hour and a half later and have 5 data sources ready to be queried. It's just like, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, like, as you see these projects getting implemented with more and more companies, companies moving towards being more data driven, are there any sort of elements of that really excite you about what can come in the next few years here?
Yeah, I think every organization is a data company, whether, like I said, it doesn't matter the vertical they're in, like data is key to their business. And there was a frozen food company I worked with back in the US. You assume, okay, frozen food, like you guys probably aren't a data company, but as they brought their kind of goods through the pipeline, it was like, how much does it weigh? How much are we losing? What is the transport cost? How long does it take to get there? Like, how long can we freeze it for? And all this stuff is driven by data. And so when I think about some of the cool stuff we're working on in Europe, it's kind of that aha moment when we start to work with companies that start having access to the data and being able to provide it to more of their employees. Some of the things that they realize they can do internally, but also some of the ways that they realize that they can do things externally. We're working with one of the largest shipping companies in Europe, and they realized, okay, every single car that they have for delivery has a GPS device with cellular connection in it. And they said, well, we now have the signal strength of every address in Greater Europe. Why don't we work with some of the telcos to share that information and show them maybe where their blind spots are in terms of cell coverage? And now there's partnerships there that weren't there before, and it's become, data is becoming a revenue stream for this organization, not just a cost center or something that they were using internally before. I think that's really where I'm excited, is kind of the partnership that we're seeing and the connection between organizations in terms of data that lives outside of their 4 walls.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and tell Taylor I say hi.
Thank you again to Bob, Magnus, and Alex for the interviews, for the insights, for the ideas.